now we are moving on to the forearm muscles. Before we start the really good flexion and extensor of the forearm, we have one more muscle that is located on the forearm, but the action is on the elbow, and this is the brachioradialis. Brachioradialis doesn't go to the lateral, but goes to the supracondyle ridge of the lateral supracondyle ridge of the humerus, so it's just up here, and runs to this point here, that is the styloid process of radius. So there's the name of this muscle, which is just this one here. Now, what is this muscle? Most likely the action is the elbow flexion, but not on the supine or prone position. It's elbow flexion on a neutral position. They call this one the hammer muscle. It's the most superficial, and also in anatomic position this is considered the most lateral muscle on the forearm. Now with this one we bring us to three muscles that do the elbow flexion: biceps brachii, brachialis, and the brachioradialis. And now from here we're going to move on to the extensor group. Okay, we're going to start first with the extensor carporadialis longus. Just below here we have the lateral epicondyle of the humerus, going from this point here to the base of the second metacarpal. We have extensor carporadialis longus. Only by the name extensor carporadialis longus tells you also the action. But what do we say about the extensor group? Most likely all the extensor group have the same origin, which is the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. So the origin lateral epicondyle of the humerus, insertion at the base of the second metacarpal. So when we contract this muscle, we have extension of the wrist and also radial deviation, or some books they say abduction. We know that the wrists have extension, flexion, ulnar, and radial deviation. So this muscle does extension and radial deviation. If you need to stretch this muscle, it's going to do flexion and ulnar deviation. Now, what muscle can be synergist and antagonist with this muscle? The best muscle to be synergist and antagonist at the same time with the extensor carporadialis, it's going to be extensor carpo-ulnaris. Why? Because they are synergists because both do extension, and are antagonists because radialis is going to do radial deviation, where ulnaris is going to do ulnar deviation. And now we're moving on to the second muscle on the extensor group, which is the extensor carporadialis brevis, which have the same origin, lateral epicondyle, and when it runs down here, goes to the base of the third metacarpal. Now, by being the base of the third metacarpal, this muscle does only extension of the wrist. Does not do any radial or ulnar deviation because being on the center of the metacarpal, the middle one. So the best way to stretch this muscle is only flexion of the wrist. Synergists, they can be with each other. Longus and brevis can be synergists to each other because they both do extension. Antagonists can be the flexor carporadialis because they do flexion. And then we finish the muscle number 2, and we're moving on to the extensor carpo-ulnaris. Extensor carpo-ulnaris start again from the lateral epicondyle and just run and goes on the base of the fifth metacarpal. This muscle, like the rest of the extensor group, does extension of the wrist, but the difference is because it's on the base of the fifth, doesn't do radial deviation, does ulnar deviation. So this muscle is extension and ulnar deviation. If you need to stretch this muscle, you need to flex it and to radial deviate it. And as extensor carporadialis, extensor carpo-ulnaris, they are synergists or an antagonist to each other. So we can work vice versa in the same way for the extensor carpo-ulnaris. Most likely we consider all those three muscles superficial muscle. We have also another muscle which is the last muscle of the extensor group that we will be learning, which is the extensor digitorum. The extensor digitorum As you see, it's easy. All those muscles have the same origin, which is the lateral epicondyle of the humerus. And when it runs down here, they spray on the all four of them. And they go to extension expansion of the 4 fingers. By going to extension expansion of 4 fingers, this muscle not only assists to the extension of the wrist, okay, but also this muscle does also extension of the phalanges on the, which one? Middle phalanges joint. What is the middle phalanges joint? We have the proximal phalanges, medial phalanges, and the distal phalanges. So it goes till here that does extension. This is another 4th muscle that just is superficial. The best synergies for this muscle is going to be the extensor caporadialis brevis, which is just only do extension of the wrist. And the best antagonist to this muscle, they can be the flexor digitorum superficialis, or even profundus too at the same time. One more muscle before we finish all the connection of the muscle on the lateral epicondyle. The last one is the supinator. Also, supinator start the same origin, which is the lateral epicondyle of the humerus, and just run to 1/3 of the proximal radius. So this is the way. This is the deepest muscle on the extensor group. So if you need to go to this muscle to straighten and strip, the best way is to work on the all extensors first, and after you can go to this one at the end. So you break down the superficial muscle before you go to the deep muscle. Stripping is this direction, when the cross fibers in this direction. When you contract the supinator, what happened? Supination. What's the best way to stretch it? You need to pronate it to stretch the supinator. What is the antagonist of the supinator? Pronator teres or pronator quadratus. What about synergies of the supinator? It's only one muscle, it's on the arm, biceps brachii. That does flexion and also supination, so there can be synergies to the supinator. And here we conclude all the muscles that are attached to the lateral epicondyle. And next we're going to talk about the muscles that are going to connect to the medial epicondyle, they call the flexor group.